Nine, 8, 3, 2, and 1.
Thank you, and welcome to the City Council meeting of April 18th, 2024. I'm calling the meeting to order at 8:31 p.m. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and can we get a roll call vote, please?
Madam Mayor, we have no requests under roll call item A, so I'll do the roll call now. Councilmember Cunningham?
Here.
Councilmember Davis? Councilmember Lentz?
Here.
Councilmember Mackin?
Here.
And Mayor O'Connell.
Here. Great. That brings us to the adoption of the agenda. Can I get a first and a second to adopt the agenda as it stands?
So moved.
And
Second.
Second, thank you. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
And we will move on to oral communications number 1. I have one slip from the public. Ron Davis, would you like to join us at the podium?
I just came here today to wish my daughter a happy birthday,
This guy.
to say how much I love her and how proud I am of her, and how she's just the best daughter anybody could have asked for.
Oh, thanks.
And I'm so proud of what you do for the city, and I'm just grateful for you.
Thank you.
And that's it.
Well, thank you. We're not supposed to respond to comments, but I think that's a very sweet one.
Okay, you have a nice meeting, and a nice night, all of you.
Thank you.
I was like, what's he here for?
Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak on an item that's not on our agenda tonight? Seeing no hands raised, do we have anyone online?
No hands raised, Madam Mayor.
Great, thank you. That's going to bring us to our consent calendar. And I do have a request from Councilmember Mackin to pull item C for discussion. And so can I get a first and a second to approve consent B and C?
You mean,
Or no, excuse
B,
me,
D, and A.
B, D, just.
I
and
have to abstain
you're
from
abstaining
E.
from
So
E.
I'll make
So-
a motion I'll make a motion to approve items B and D.
Okay, and a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. And then,
Aye, sorry.
do we want to do the discussion for, Colleen, would you like to go ahead with item C, discussion or questions?
Sure, we could. Okay, thank you. I did alert staff to some of the questions I had to give them an opportunity to give us a little bit of feedback. This is concerning Kinder Morgan, the business tax on liquid storage facilities. Couple things noted, and thank you very much for a really great staff report on this. And a couple notable things during 2019 was the pre-COVID year. From that point forward, the number of barrels of liquid storage, it went down, slowly been creeping up, and then we come to calendar year 2023, and it's plummeted again. And the staff report says very clearly there was a decrease in barrels as a result of losing a significant customer. Some diesel customers have also shifted their business away to renewable diesel, which is available at other locations. So if we look at 2019 pre-COVID year and we compare it to what is reported for 2023, the revenues are down then about almost 171,000, which is significant revenue to the city of Brisbane. So I had two questions that I had asked staff to give us a little bit of feedback, and I also said that a response of we'll have to look into it and get back to you is perfectly acceptable. Obviously, this begs the question, a lot of questions about what's going on, a lot of thought about how this will affect us going forward. But also I had a resident that said to me, how do you know what they tell you in terms of the volume is what really happened? And maybe going forward, we need to examine some other ways of controls on this. But I would just appreciate, Carolina, I don't know if you or Clay could address that. I'm not suggesting anything was wrong. I don't think that's the case. I'm just saying going forward, do we want some sort of stricter guidelines or controls on investigating whether what's being reported is truly what's going on? And then also just my own commentary for the council is, I think noting this revenue going down because of the number of electric vehicles that are really accelerating, okay, that's a pun, but it wasn't intended, being purchased in San Mateo County, we may see these revenues go down even further, and it's something we need to be aware of and plan for. So, Carolina, Clay?
Okay, I'll go ahead. Thank you. And thank you for the heads up. Give us some time to put our thoughts together. First, I just wanted to give an explanation on the process of what we get from Kinder Morgan. So they do supply us with a summary of the barrels over the rack for the prior year. And I also have requested their internal process to understand their approval. And so it is one department that is obtaining a system-generated report that is reviewed by, and that's done in Texas in their accounting department, and it is reviewed by their Brisbane site manager just to make sure that everything looks reasonable, and that is what's forwarded and what is forwarded to us for review. Upon that review receiving that data, we also take a look to see if there is significant fluctuation. So we look year over year and trend. And so for the past few years, we have been asking for additional information to better understand what is going on beyond COVID impact. We've also requested some projection figures from them because not only do we want to know what's going on, what happened year over year, but we're also interested in what to expect for the future. So we've already requested from them a 5-year projection or whatever's available that they can provide. We are still in the process of receiving the projection information, but the explanations that they've been able to provide to us were included in the report. The other area is that for 2022, the location that was offering renewable diesel was opened in mid-2022. And so for 2023, that site was open now for a full year. So that is another area to consider. We are happy to explore further. We understand there could be some compliance reports that they have to file, so we wanted to take a look at that information as well to give another method of validation. And we also are open, if the council so requires, that we would hire an external auditor specifically to review the revenue. We already have an auditor for our financials, but this would be a specific review of this revenue stream.
And when you say compliance reports, you're alluding to governmental agencies that they have to report to make sure the figures match.
Correct.
Okay.
So,
Thank you for that.
yes, so the site manager is responsible for or has indicated that they do file some reports, so that we're trying to get our hands on those.
I think that corroboration isn't out of line, and perhaps if they deal with other governmental, local governments, they may have to do that. And I don't think that they would be surprised to hear that request. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Karen, did you have a question for
Just a real
staff?
quick question. Carolina, how long do you think it's going to take to get that final information back from them?
I'm hoping to get it within the next week or so, because in order for the turnaround to get this information invoiced and collected by June 30, we would want to, to have this information to you no later than next meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah, I do.
Cliff,
a couple questions.
please
Thank you,
go ahead.
Terry. First of all, I just want to thank Colleen for pulling this and addressing this issue. Yeah, I had some questions too, but I'm glad that you pulled it and talked with staff about it. So, Carolina, you had mentioned that you had requested information in the past. How far back in the past did you request that information?
I took over this process the last reporting year, so I requested the forecast from them last year. They weren't able to provide it, so we requested again.
So we requested again now.
Again, but they were able to provide some information on the initial decrease that we saw between 21 and 22.
Okay. Did they give you a reason for why they could not give you that information?
That we weren't able to obtain.
Okay.
So
All right.
again,
So,
that's why we're asking again.
okay. So now it sounds like you think it would be prudent for us to do some kind of audit, since they have been reluctant to provide information. It's been over a year, and so we set up this current format to accommodate them, right? Before there was this, we had a charge on the storage, and they said, hey, that's not fair to us. This is a more fair process. We agreed to it, and now we're getting, I'm not saying we're getting the runaround, but it kind of seems like it. And so, how would an audit go? I know you mentioned it, but if you could explain a little bit more about that process.
We would have to hire an external party, so there is a cost involved, but in order to review the records, the data, any distribution records that they have, to tie them back to any official system generated data, transactional data that they have. And again, looking into any compliance reporting would also be part of that review. So we're hoping to do some of that internally before we would request an external party to assist to limit the cost. However, if the council thinks it's worth expanding that review, we're open to what you suggest.
Okay. No, I think definitely that's something that we should discuss. The last question is, so in 2020, we charged them $400,000. That's the maximum allowed. Do we have a minimum in our agreement with them?
My understanding, it's not a minimum because it's based off the Muni code, so it's not an agreement. And so it's just
So
the,
we can't apply a minimum. Okay, okay, but we can't apply a
a
maximum.
max, correct.
Right, and we applied the maximum just
Few
because
years
we
ago.
felt it was fair.
Right.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions from staff or for staff? Any discussion or should we open this up for public hearing, I guess, since we're discussing it? Is there any members of the public that would like to weigh in on this? Seeing no hands raised and none online?
I have a, Madam Mayor, I have a hand raised from Chris.
You do? Okay, please go ahead, Chris.
Hi there. Yeah, this is an interesting thing. I'm sure you're aware that we had allowed, the government, the EPA had allowed the natural gas industry to self-report for many, many years. Now that we have satellites to observe what's actually going on, we're finding that those reports are not necessarily accurate. So I really appreciate that we're examining this carefully. And we might find that there are technological solutions to take a look at these things. Thank you.
Thank you. So what is the council's wishes? Do we want to go ahead and approve the resolution?
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's possible to approve this amount, but not be, that's it, that we perhaps do some kind of audit, and that if there is a discrepancy in what they're saying, that then they would owe us for the additional money.
Maybe staff can bring back the
Madam Mayor,
cost.
Would that be something that the city
Possible, I don't
attorney
know.
would want to
Can
weigh
I
in
ad-
on if that's
Mayor,
possible?
can I just, I think we can short circuit the discussion tonight. What we're really asking is to bring this back at the next meeting, because we want to ask some additional questions to Kinder Morgan, and also look at the reports they have to file with other agencies for consistency, and then we can bring all that information back to you. If not the next meeting, then the following meeting. We have until June 30th to do this, and I think it'd
Okay.
be better to do it with the full amount that we're going to need for next, or that we're going to apply for next year, and do it once and have it,
Yeah.
not create confusion with it.
That's
Okay.
good.
No,
Okay,
that
so,
totally makes
so
sense.
what we'll do is continue
Continue
this
this, yeah.
item to a future meeting?
And
And-
I would appreciate legal's opinion on what Cliff just said.
Right, I imagine that, if someone's having an intent to defraud, that there would be ramifications to that, but again, that's
Mayor,
something
I want to
that-
be very clear to the
But we're not
council.
insinuating that
Nobody
at
on
all.
staff is insinuating that
No, no,
anybody's done anything wrong here. And I think that this conversation, not that the council went there, but I think people in the community can easily kind of go there sometimes. I just want to make it very clear, we are not asserting that. We've not seen anything that suggests that. That's not what this is about. It's just about getting proper accounting.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, there's a hand raised from Michelle Salmon.
Sure, please go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that this is not being televised on Channel 27 right now, and it is supposed to be. No, it's not. I'm not seeing it on Channel 27, so I hope you guys can get that fixed right away, since that's how a lot of people access the meeting.
We'll let her breath.
We'll take that into note.
Okay, thank you.
I have one moment. Just on that call. Ingrid, City Clerk, can we tell from the cabinet if it's being broadcast to our TVs? Can we tell internally?
It's working via Zoom and it's working through live stream.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so do we need to vote on continuing this, or would you prefer a vote?
Well,
to
how
continue
about
this
staff
item?
will just withdraw consideration for tonight? We'll
Okay.
bring back in either 2 or 4 weeks.
Okay, thank you very much.
Just one more comment on this, if I could.
Sure.
Just, I would request of staff in talking to Kinder Morgan, whatever.
Your
you-
mic's not on.
In talking to Kinder Morgan, whatever conversation you have, perhaps broach the topic of your preferred methodology, what you want to see as their reporting going forward, so they don't assume they can just go back to what they've been giving us.
That's already been discussed with our initial contact.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to item E, and that is the item to approve the Brisbane Chamber of Commerce and Brisbane Lions Club's A Night at Little Reno as a co-sponsored event. Councilmember Davis is going to abstain from this vote. I believe she can stay in the room for the discussion.
If we anticipate any kind of, we didn't do it once because we knew there was no discussion. If there is going to be a discussion, then Councilmember Davis should step out of the room.
Okay. If I can get approval to approve item E, or do we need a discussion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, and
Abstain. Do I need to say that? Abstain.
You're good. Thank you.
okay. Item F.
I need to recuse myself from item F. I will leave the room now.
Okay. This is to receive the results of parking pilot program letter that was sent to Tulare and Thomas Street. Can we get a staff report, please?
Good evening, Council. I'll begin with a very brief summary of the development of the residential parking permit program in the past couple of months. On February 1st, the original program went to the City Council for a proposed residential parking permit program in all of central Brisbane. Upon council discussion, it was decided that it was determined that the staff should prepare a letter to draft for residents on Tulare and Thomas Street to gauge public interest in a trial pilot program on these streets. So staff proceeded to draft a letter, and we returned with this letter on March 7th. After reading the letter in its entirety and discussing it, it was mentioned that a point that should be added is mentioning the number of street signs that would be placed on Tulare and Thomas as if a proposed program was enacted. And after we incorporated this point, we mailed out these letters on March 20th to all residents on Tulare and Thomas. After giving it a few days, we only received about 5 responses. And after that, staff went out with Caroline and Matthew and Karen and I. We all went to Thomas and Tulare, and we went door to door with letters in our hand, essentially reminding the residents to give their feedback or mail in the letter, and also providing another copy of this letter. And the results we got for this letter was support on Tulare Street, and then not as much support on Thomas Avenue. Oh, sorry.
It's kind of a joint staff report. So we did get some verbal feedback when we knocked on doors, but we encouraged everyone to send back a letter or by email or by phone call to follow up. So at the time that we wrote the agenda report, we had 52 responses. We call those usable because there were some letters returned with no information, no name or address, just a box checked. So we couldn't verify that that was not a duplicate or from a unique household or from a household in the project area. 3 letters returned to sender. We got 2 more responses after the deadline, which we added to the tally. I wanted to point out in the agenda report that a few people were confused about parameter number 1 of the letter that stated one permit will be, as written, one permit will be issued per licensed driver for one vehicle when both driver and vehicle are registered to the address. Those approximately 3 people each thought, or households, each thought that that only meant one permit per their household. So when that was clarified, they wanted to vote yes in 2 of the 3 cases. So we don't know if more people might have been confused by that or not. So of the responses at the time, so add 2 more, 34 in favor and 20 against. On Thomas Avenue, those didn't change, 19 in favor and 15 against. And on Tulare Street, 15 in favor and 15 opposed.
Did you say 15 against on Thomas?
No, 5.
Or
5.
15?
Sorry, I might have said 15.
You're hard to hear.
Okay. And we did, by knocking on doors, we heard some commentary and in writing, some people had more cars than they had drivers, so they were opposed to the program. There were a couple of those. One did not want to pay $20 for a permit. I spoke to them. And one thought that there should be a more robust allowance for guest permits. it was an email and I responded that the program was weeknights from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And if they had parking on their site, they could park their guest on their site and put their car on the street, but I didn't get any response beyond that.
So I'm going to ask this question. All in all, we did not reach the target amount of households to respond, and we did not get the target households of people who wanted it to meet our thresholds.
Well, I think when we planned to send out the letter, we were hoping to hear from everyone. And then the goal was that that a majority would want the program. So, not everybody, some units were empty. When we knocked on doors, we found that some were empty, so we weren't going to get a response from those. They're rentals, and they were in the process of being turned out. One was being painted, for a new tenant. Some people maybe, I don't know, this is the number that we got back, the 50, what did I say? In total, 54. We got, again, 6 that didn't have, one came back, was returned in that envelope. We sent a self-addressed stamped envelope with nothing checked.
How many total households are on Thomas?
It's 112 between both streets, so. Yes, 54 usable.
And we have 40 people that want it.
But, I mean, if we did one street, right? If we wanted to do just one street, I think it's important to know, since Thomas had the most support by far, it'd be good to know how many households are even on Thomas. So we can gauge whether we are close to 50%, 50, more, less, whatever.
So Madam Mayor, if I may, I think I would pose the answer to that question a little bit differently. If you were looking at this and wanting to get a quota that would be applied to a self-initiated request for this, clearly we didn't hit anywhere near the existing 70%.
Well, sure.
And clearly we didn't hit anywhere near the 50%. But I think the other item you may wish to consider is that when you send out a letter like this, it's what we call an unrequested survey. Typically, if you get back 15% of the responses, that's a pretty good response. And I think, Caroline, as our communication manager, could probably agree with that. And in this case, and partially it's because staff actively went out, we got 50% response back. So that's a pretty good response ratio. So I would suggest that the numbers you get out of there, how they balance from yay or nay, should be considered fairly representative of what's going on in the street. So I hope that helps your discussion.
But you don't have an idea of how many households are on Thomas, just for me.
We think it's about 45 on Thomas and about 65 on Tulare.
Did you guys translate the letter in other languages?
No, we did not do that. So at this point, we've done that survey, we've done that outreach, and we are here at council asking if you have direction for next steps, based on what we found out.
Okay, well, do we have any other questions for staff?
I have one.
No.
Sorry, I'm forgetting
Sure,
to turn
go
on the
ahead,
mic.
Colleen, and then we'll get to you next.
Did you, just out of curiosity, come up with another way when you had to address people who didn't understand one permit will be issued per licensed driver? Another way of wording that? I don't have a suggestion for you yet, by the way.
Well, I think we would have added the word each somewhere in there.
Okay.
Per each licensed driver with a unique vehicle, something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, actually, I don't have any questions.
Don't have any questions. Okay, let's open it up for public comment. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak?
Madam Mayor, I see no hands raised.
So we'll move into discussion. I'll close the public hearing. To me, this seems like we're chasing rainbows. I'm not sure if, when we get a whole crew out to go knock on doors, try to solicit responses, and we still have such low participation and low approval rates, are we doing something that this community really wants? Mm-hmm. Or are we, pushing a different agenda? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I mean, if the 45 households is in the general neighborhood of what's actually on Thomas, 19 yeses is about 42%, which I would say, I mean, considering there's so much of the sample still left, like, it's not like everyone responded. There's still a whole lot left of responses, but I would say it's it's 4-1, right? With the responses that there are currently on Thomas.
What do you mean, 4-1 in favor?
Yeah, 19 in favor and 5 opposed.
I thought it was 15 and 15.
Well, I don't know. She said was it 15 or was it 5? She said 5.
Tulare is 15 and 15. Because
What?
we
Okay, Tulare.
we got one more response, yay, and one nay on
I'm
Tulare.
sorry. Did I say Tulare? I meant Thomas.
And Thomas was 19,
And 5.
and I heard 15 also.
And I corrected that. I meant to say 5. 19 and 5 as it's written.
On Tulare.
On Thomas.
And they're 50-50 against it and for it on Tulare.
Tulare, I think, is a no-go. There's no clear consensus. You could extrapolate that data and would say that it's like right in the middle. To me, it's too close to call based on this. But if we looked at Thomas, 19 in favor and 5 opposed, that's like a 4-1 response. So,
If that's the case, yes.
right. And there's unknowns, right? Because if there are 45 households total, 19 have responded yes, 5 have responded no. There's still some out there that have been uncollected. But again, it wasn't translated in other languages. So that might affect the response rate. Plus, no one is going to respond to you're just never going to get 100% response rate. Randy's right about that. So while it's not, 51% of all of the households, it is 42% with still quite a lot outstanding. I could go either way, but I think that, if we really were married to the idea of like wanting to test this out, to me, the street we would choose is Thomas. But I struggle with the way that it's written itself, like what the parameters are. I don't think those parameters are going to move the needle very much. And it's going to be an upfront cost for us with all the signage and all of that. And it's also the burden is going to fall on residents to call between those hours that people are probably not going to be out policing their neighbors on their street. So, for that reason, I don't think that the way that we've structured the program is going to be very effective. But if we're looking at do streets want it, the strongest case you can make would be for Thomas. And I think while it's not the ideal response rate, I think it is pretty solid. So it could go either way.
Discussion?
Thank you. I concur with what Randy said. There are some people who just are not going to respond to a survey, or they go, I don't care. Whatever you tell me I have to do, I'm going to do. They may be ambivalent, or they'll say, oh, it'll never happen, or great, someone else will take care of it. So it's hard to say percentages of whether this is a inferior survey result. I tend to agree with what Councilmember Davis said. 19-5 is pretty solid evidence. Considering the fact that we have the new crosswalk law that has gone into effect, is not ready for enforcement until next year, but is warnings at this point, I think we may find that we could end up with streets where people are asking us to do a permit program on their street because the consequences of losing so many spaces all over town, the ramifications are going to be felt. If we are ever going to wrestle with the permit issue, we never said that if we did this, that it absolutely would go on forever. We talked about this as a pilot. If we never do a pilot, we don't know what we're dealing with. We've had complete streets and staff spend well, I think it was a year, looking into this, trying to gather information from other cities. I think that the results are pretty conclusive. At the very least, I think Thomas has expressed their sentiments and that we should honor that. We can always remove the program. They may come back to us and say it's not working, but we have a lot to learn from this. And it may also transfer then to situations on other streets. So I don't know anyone in town that says, I love permits. That's not the issue here. The issue is that people want a place to park. And this guarantees if you have a car and it's registered in Brisbane and your driver's license is here, you will get a permit. You will have that ability to park on the street.
I disagree. It doesn't give anyone the guarantee of a parking place. No permit does.
There's
but-
no guarantees in life.
Okay,
But
but I mean,
it
but-
gives them the assurance that they have the right, they
They're-
have the
they're legal
first
to,
right to
yes.
park there.
They're
Yes.
legal to.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad that we've gone through this process, and because we've been dealing with parking issues for decades, and I think this is the closest that we've come to trying something out. And we chose these two streets because we felt that they had issues, and it seemed like the public was, asking for some kind of assistance potentially. Yeah, it looks like Tulare, and I agree with Randy. I mean, yeah, to get 100%, that's not going to happen. But it's just like voting. The polls close, and the margins usually don't change as the votes come in. And I don't think Tulare is going to change. It's going to be, split down the middle. And, typically, though, when people don't respond, or many times when people don't respond, it's because they don't care. They're not interested. So I think if you were to get everybody, it would probably be against. Though the 19-5 it's saying, hey, yeah, we have some issues on this street, and Thomas is a little bit different because it's really apartments, and so I would be willing to have staff work with the folks that live there and come up with something potentially that works for them, and then allocate some funds to put up some signs and do the program, but only on Thomas, not on Tulare.
Any other comments? How do we want to go on this? I know Cliff says we should go ahead with Thomas. I think it's going to backfire on us, but, if it's the council's wish, I'd say, okay, I hate to spend the money on something that may or may not work, but you never know until you try.
It'll be interesting to see if the airport parkers, if that's such a big issue, as many claim, will end up just dumping themselves on another street. And it'll be interesting to see, like, how big of a impact that is, if it really curbs airport parking or if it just redistributes the airport parkers to one street down on Tulare. But yeah, I mean, I think that the nail in the coffin for this is going to be neighbors having to call in the complaints, and especially between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. I know people can call earlier, but I just feel like that's going to be the place where this falls apart. But, we would have to see to know for sure. It'd be interesting to, has staff thought about what constitutes success? So what constitutes success? Is it fines? Like, we know that this is working because we've had however many complaints that have come in, we've issued citations, we're catching people that are parking that are non-compliant? Is it that, you know, we find a way to follow up with as many residents as possible on Thomas to ask, you know, did you find it, how much easier did you find it was to park your vehicle? Or, you know, I'm curious, like, whenever you create a system with rules, oftentimes you find people try to find ways to curb the rules, or, you know, to find a loophole or a workaround. It's just human behavior. But I'd be interested to know, like, how do we know this works?
So we did talk about that a little bit. Like, what if the council wants to do a program? Are we going to ask for specific feedback? And Tomas and I came to the conclusion that we would probably go back door to door and talk to people and gather results and bring that to you.
I would really encourage that this is at least translated. What any more communications about this are translated into Spanish and, you know, Chinese, Mandarin, or whatever, because I think that because there is so many apartments there, I think you have a real diverse, you know, you have a lot of diversity on that street. And I think that by not translating, we're not actually capturing a lot of feedback that we could be. So that's what I would ask if, when we go back. And even if we have, did you guys did that happen where when you were out, you know, talking to people, that there was a language barrier at all that you came across?
Tomas and I did Thomas, and I did not. Did you?
Okay.
Tomas speaks Spanish, so that would have been
Okay.
helpful.
Did anyone want to speak in Spanish? No? No. Okay.
No.
Got it.
If I can just interject here, I had some dialogue with a resident on Thomas who apparently had talked to a lot of his neighbors. And he had told me that one of the reasons a lot of the residents on Thomas were in favor of this is that they started watching the cars, because it's not a huge long street. And the cars that were parking there were from other streets around the corners. And they felt like if those other cars were not coming into their block, they had plenty of parking. But it's being taken by cars that are in apartments on San Bruno and further down or near the school. And they were watching, literally observed this happening. And they said, if we just had the permits for the people who live here, we've got enough parking.
Well, also in one of the letters that we received, someone said that, like, in order to be able to park late at night, the other person that lives in the apartment has to put the car out, and then when she comes home, they have to do a swap so that she can park in that spot, and then, or that she could, they reserve a spot on the street so that the other person can park in the parking space that comes with their unit, because if she comes after a certain time at night, there's just zero chance she's going to get a spot. And when you're in those kinds of situations, like, that's how it is, like, in Daly City in San Francisco and so many neighborhoods. That sounds very serious, like very serious parking issues. So, I mean, did we price it out and I just missed it? So the calculated number of signs needed for the 2 trial streets and estimates the cost to be $5,000. So for that's 17 signs on Tulare and only 7 on Thomas. So I'd assume that would be much less than 5,000 if we would just do Thomas of an upfront cost.
Yeah, around 2,000 is probably a better estimate.
Okay. So 2,000 plus IPS group is 5,000. So $7,000. And we might recoup some from tickets and permits.
Now, the permit cost that was $20, that's beyond these costs and paid by the residents, so there's nothing.
Oh, it just evens out.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So how much would a citation be for parking?
If I'm
without a permit?
correct, our parking citation's around $35 now, but we only collect $9 of that, I've been told. out of each ticket.
Is 35. We collect 9.
Yeah,
We're really raking in the dough.
yeah.
Okay. And so for the 10 permits, the 10 guest permits, is that the number that we had thought we would give for a year? Or what did we think we would do 20 for the year, and therefore the 6 permits is more like the 6-month calculation?
Yeah, we thought we'd do 20 for the year.
Okay. $7,000, I think, listen, nobody likes more rules. I agree with you, Terry. But I do think that parking is such a big issue in Brisbane. We hear about it all the time. You know, people want something to be done, but not in any way that inconveniences them.
Not on their street. That's what
not
it
on-
always, just do
They want it
something.
fixed on their street, but they just don't, they want it to
Somehow.
snap their fingers. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that there are residents who have complained about this for years, and I think that it would be in everyone's best interest to have tried something and actually have some results. So we can say, look, we put this program together. This is what we learned. This is why it works. This is why it doesn't work. We found residents loved it. We found residents hated it, whatever it may be, so that we know how we are going to approach parking in the future. And, you know, we may throw our hands up and say, we have just as many people, like on Tulare, right? We have just as many people who want it as those who don't. But I think the only real way that we are going to address an issue that people have been harping on for years is to just do a trial. And frankly, what might work on Thomas might not work on Kings. I mean, we just don't know. But I think $7,000 is not a number that frightens me to spend to get some of these answers to these questions.
I think that we should be thanking the residents of Thomas for their willingness to stick their neck out in this decades-long controversy and say, yes, we want to try this and see if it works.
It
And
may just be that street.
it may always just be that street, but we've never even had one group of residents from a street in Brisbane ever apply because no one wants to be responsible for circulating that petition. So it shows the city has to take that responsibility to do it, and then some people will respond.
But that threshold is high.
Yes.
Well, we're gonna
Tonight,
talk about
we're
that in a
going
minute,
to-
right?
Yeah,
Yes.
right.
That's
Talk
a
about
separate
yes.
gig. That's
Exactly.
the other threshold.
But I
yeah.
think, though, if Thomas has a lot of success, or we restructure the program to work out the kinks, we find a system that works, other streets might say, hey, we see what's happening on Thomas. We want to get in on that. Can you implement this on our street? And then we can move forward and have those conversations in the future. But I don't think we won't know until we try. So I'm in favor of moving forward.
Okay, so you'll
just
make
on-
a motion to move forward with Thomas. And is there a second?
I'll second.
And all those in favor?
Aye.
And I'm going to say no.
Okay.
Okay.
We can invite Councilmember Cunningham back in, I believe, for the next.
Yes, ma'am. We'll give her a minute to get back to the dais.
Okay. Welcome back.
Well, thank you.
So that moves us on to item G, to consider introduction of parking ordinance, waiving first reading and revising 10.26 of the Brisbane Municipal Code concerning residential parking permit program. Staff report, please.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, council members. So this is a rather logical follow-on to the earlier discussion you just had where you gave staff guidance to go ahead and implement a residential parking pilot program on Thomas Road. And there are really three things that this ordinance does. The first thing, which is direction previously given by council, is that it lowers the percentage for voluntary, for resident-initiated programs to go from the current municipal code requirement of 70% down to a simple majority. The second thing it does is it provides council, and very clearly, and this was directed by the city attorney that we implement this, it provides you the authority to impose residential parking restrictions by resolution. So in other words, once this ordinance is in place, we will at that point in time come back to you with a resolution for you to formally enact the guidance that you just provided to us to initiate this parking program on Thomas. And the last thing it does is it goes through and it clears up some of the vagaries and some of the unclear items that were in there. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions for staff?
No.
No? Okay. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on this item? Seeing no hands raised in the audience, are there any members online?
There are no hands raised, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. We'll close the public hearing and go into discussion. Any discussion?
Perhaps you could fill me in?
This is just changing our ordinance. It's not enacting anything.
Okay.
This is just changing our ordinance to give us the ability to enact other things. On the previous item, it did pass to do just Thomas.
Just Thomas. Okay, thanks. That's all I needed to know.
Okay. So unless there's discussion, I think
make
the
a motion.
ordinance is good. A motion made by Councilmember Davis. Second by Councilmember Lentz. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Any opposed? No. Okay, that brings us to staff reports. And does the city manager have a report on upcoming activities?
Yes, Madam Mayor, we have a number of items that are coming up this weekend. We have tomorrow or Saturday night, the Spring Thing, Brisbane School District's biggest fundraiser of the year. This supports BES, Lippman, and Panorama. It's a Saturday evening event from 6 to 11 p.m. at Mission Blue Center. The Parks and Recreation Department will be offering a parents' night out on this evening to make it easier for parents to drop off their kids and enjoy the Spring Thing. Through pickup is by 10 p.m. There is still 11 spots available in the Parents' Night Out. You can find more information on the city's website on that, brisbaneca.org. Earlier that day on Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m., we will be having the annual Habitat Restoration Day for celebration of Earth Month. Volunteers to remove invasive plants and protect endangered species such as the Mission Blue and Calliope silver spot butterflies. You can sign up at mountainwatch.org. Next Wednesday, the Open Space and Ecology Committee will be meeting a bit earlier than normal so that they can set out with the community members for the Dark Skies Night Hike, get a taste of the city's current lighting and landscaping during the hike. You can sign up for the hike at brisbaneca.org/night hike. We will also have a couple of community members, one of them on our open space committee that is working on a collection of the solar eclipse glasses. She's doing it through her workplace at NASA. They'll be collecting those by April 24th here at City Hall, and they are being donated to a program called Astronomers Without Borders. Finally, we want to make sure that everybody viewing, or I've got actually one more besides this. Last week, viewing that we are currently recruiting for open seats on the Open Space and Ecology Committee, as well as the IDEA Committee, Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accountability. There's also a trustee vacancy with the County Mosquito and Vector Control District. You can visit the city's website at brisbaneca.org for more information. The application for all three closes on Tuesday, April 30th. And then finally, for the council and also for community members who are interested, we would like to schedule a May 23rd budget workshop with the city council. That's an off Thursday. The idea would be that would be the overview of the budget for 24-25 fiscal year. And it would be also the department presentations From that evening, we would imagine there'll be council discussion and direction. And we hope to bring back a final budget to your June 6th meeting for consideration. That also gives us a one meeting we have the ability to meet on the 6th, and if we're not quite ready, we can bring it back to the June 20th meeting for approval. And as you know, you always want to have your budget approved by June 30th so that you don't get marked up in your annual audit. So that's an important important deadline to keep in mind.
I'm gonna be out of town
On when?
the 23rd.
Okay. We could do it the following week, the 30th. It doesn't give us much turnaround time.
I will be here for that.
You won't be?
I will.
Will, okay. We would just have to work with that timeline.
I didn't bring my calendar, but I'm sure I can make it for either date.
Okay, we'll send out a reminder on that. If we are not able to do the follow-up on the 6th, then we'd have to bring it to the 20th, but just keep in mind that on June.
Does it have to be on a Thursday?
It does not have to be on a Thursday.
Yeah, maybe we can do
So
that.
if we have a conflict, we can see if there's another date that might work for staff and council.
If you wanted to do maybe that Tuesday after Memorial Day, would that work?
No, that's worst.
That's
Maybe
worse?
the
Okay.
21st. Maybe the 21st.
The 21st?
I don't have a calendar with me, so
Okay,
We'll talk about it
let's do a
offline.
doodle poll or something.
We'll send a doodle poll out, but we were hoping to have at least one or two meeting kind of slack in the schedule so that we can make sure we get this adopted before the end of the fiscal year.
I could do the
Understandable.
21st if that's helpful.
Okay.
Okay,
I'm glad at least we have some initial dates that won't work, so that helps.
okay. So then that brings us to written communications. Oh, no, countywide assignments and subcommittee reports. And we have one from the Affordable Housing Subcommittee, which was Councilmember Davis and Lance.
Yeah, there's something highlighted that about another meeting, but we already reported out on that. On
Yeah.
the public art advisory, it's highlighted, but we already gave a report on that.
No.
Do you want me to do it or you want to do it?
You can do it.
Okay. So, Councilmember Lentz and I met, we discussed rebuilding together, and we talked about, if it was the council's pleasure to give rebuilding together money annually, that maybe a better process would be, to give it to them and they would figure out how to allocate that. So, with the hope of maybe doing a few projects a year at least with the allocated money, instead of, us knowing about a specific project and earmarking that for that particular project, so that there's no, semblance of favoritism or, just helping one resident in particular, that the money just goes to rebuilding together, and then rebuilding together would hustle, find applicants, and then you distribute that money. So we're a little bit removed from that process so that it's as fair as possible. And then I think if rebuilding together was getting a sum of money from the council, they'd obviously be, I think, working to find applicants or find projects every year. And so they would probably do more outreach. I would say the majority of the meeting, though, we talked about a program that Mayor O'Connell applied for in COVID. Also, way back when, during COVID, and I think it was through Jackie Spears' office, and the federal government was allocating money for cities to use for repairs to homes of residents. That so finally the city got approved for that. So the amount is in the neighborhood of $500,000. and we needed to create our own program for HUD, demonstrating who would be eligible for that money. So staff talked about for low-income residents, so you have to meet a certain income threshold. You can't own another property, so it's your only property, and you could use the money for health and safety upgrades. We're seeing that a lot, especially with our seniors. Many of you know examples in the community, but for many seniors, they're not able to keep up with the maintenance of their home as they're on a fixed income. And so that can threaten that the home's viability and their ability to stay there. But if something happens, let's say with your roof, right, and the cost is $25,000 or $50,000, and you're a senior, you may just not have that. But not making that fixed to your home could totally displace you. So this type of program would allow us to help residents like that. It also could be used for upgrades for soundproofing. So for residents who are really impacted by airplane noise, this money could be used for those types of upgrades. It could also be used for transitioning your appliances to more climate-friendly appliances. If you're a landlord, also landlords can apply for this program to make those types of upgrades, because many landlords may not be motivated to swap out a water heater, for example, because they're not living there and they may not be paying the bill, and so there's no incentive on their part. So this is something they could tap into. Is there anything? Any
You
elements that I'm
covered a
missing?
lot of stuff, Madison, so I'm impressed that you just went off the top of your head with all that info. Just a couple things in regards to rebuilding together. We evaluated general fund versus affordable housing funds, and we felt that the general fund is more appropriate just because every project is different, and some might fit the criteria that would make it, where it would be allowed, and others might not. So having it come out of the general fund and then having rebuild together, allocate the funds based upon their criteria seemed most appropriate. And then, for that grant program, so yeah, it's brand new. It just came out like days before we had our meeting. And so there's, I think it was $495,000 that's available. And the most that anyone could receive, I believe, was up to $25,000. So, and I guess we're going to make that prime time in the next blast, or when will that go out to the
I
public?
think the city is still structuring like the exact program and the application, right?
Yeah, I think it's going to be more so in the summertime. So I think the program will come open in June, and then we'll have more of a outreach about it in the July issue of the Star.
I think it's going to be like on a rolling basis, applications on a rolling basis. And from our conversations, it seemed like staff was hoping that, it might be up to 25,000, but it's not 25,000 necessarily. So hoping to get a range of projects in there. So someone might need something for 10, someone might need something for 5, someone else might need something for 25. So to try to use that money to help as many people as possible. And the way that it works is you have to provide 2 bids from reputable contractors. The city chooses which bid they prefer, and we pay the contractor directly. And then we submit all of the receipts to HUD for reimbursement. So that's how the funds work. It's all reimbursement through receipts. So there's soon to be a lot more information available, but I think that this is a very timely program, and I think that it's going to make a big impact in our community, and we just have the funds until they run out. So there's no timeline, to my understanding, on when they need to be used by.
Well, in that case, we wouldn't need to do the rebuilding together.
Well, so they are different. you know, and I think when we have our budget meeting,
Yeah.
you know,
No,
that's
that'd be
where
the
staff
time
can,
to
can go
Yeah.
over that. Mm-hmm.
Does anyone have any questions about that program? Or
No, sorry, I keep doing that tonight. I heard a lot of reference to the money having to do with, I guess it was rebuilding together. And I don't know, what is the money? How much money are we talking about?
So we're talking about two separate things, right? So there is a sum of money, $495,000 allocated to us from HUD. It's guaranteed.
I got
There's
that.
Okay.
I got that.
So the council has previously talked, I missed the meeting where you had the bulk of the conversation, but the council previously talked about allocating possibly $10,000 a year to Rebuilding Together. And yes, it was a discussion that happened that you talked about whether you wanted to do that. And the consensus at that meeting, from what I understand, is that the council wanted to wait and bring it back until we had an understanding of until we were in budget season to know if we had, let's say, $10,000 a year, if we wanted to allocate that money to Rebuilding Together. And so in preparation for that discussion that this council said they wanted to have in the future, and based on the concerns that were expressed at that time, Councilmember Lentz and I discussed that issue further so that we could be prepared with responses to the questions that you had about whether you could use affordable housing money to allocate to Rebuilding Together, so on and so forth. So that's just why we continued to discuss it, because it's my understanding that this conversation was coming back. Is that incorrect? Because again, I missed that meeting.
The return, I don't want to get in too much detail because this is not an agenda item tonight. The return discussion on the Rebuilding Together was whether the legalities were satisfied, the criteria that must be met in order to use affordable housing funds. And I just personally just have the question where the figure 10,000 came from. That just seemed to have appeared out of thin air, and I've never heard where that came from. So I think that this is something that we're going to have to discuss further.
Yeah.
And I would suggest just tabling it
Yeah.
to a future discussion.
Yeah.
And we never had a conversation about any donation coming from the general fund. That did not happen.
Okay.
I mean, we questioned it, but we didn't
Right.
resolve anything.
Yeah, exactly. We didn't resolve. And when we have our budget meeting, that's the appropriate time to do that. And if it's the council's pleasure, then, you know, to fund it, then we would do it at that time. And if not, then it doesn't make the cut.
Okay, well, thank you for that report. And we will move on to written communications.
Written communication was received from Michelle Salmon regarding the noise pollution. Also from Emil Lawrence regarding the San Mateo County Law Library.
Okay, that brings us to oral communications number 2. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on an item not on our agenda tonight?
We have a hand raised from Chris.
Okay, thank you. Please go ahead, Chris.
Hi there. Thank you very much for letting me speak. I'm a little concerned about the parking permit. We asked staff to do a survey. The results that we got were inconclusive. And it sounds like we're about to do a pilot that may equally be inconclusive in its results, because I'm not clear what this pilot is going to evaluate. So that question that was posed earlier about what is success, that's still an open question for me. The other thing about this is it seems that we're focused on accommodating vehicles rather than the residents of Brisbane. When I look at the aging population, I myself am among those. When I look at the teens in town, we don't have options. In order to live in Brisbane, you essentially need to own a car. We haven't designed this city to allow people to not have to own this car, to own a car. It's so bad. We've so conceded our streets to automobiles that we have to designate which streets students should walk on in order to be safe, even down to the side of the street that they must walk on. What is the vision that we have for Brisbane? Can seniors really age in place? I don't want to be patronized and being given 5 opportunities in a month in order to get a ride for $5. I want to be able to be independent as I age in this town. I invite the City Council to develop a vision for Brisbane. What do we want this city to look like?
Thank you very much.
Yeah. You know, I had a commute out of work meeting this morning. I apologize for not mentioning it. But I also wanted to just thank Chris, who attended the meeting. And so thank you, Chris, for being in there this morning at 8 o'clock and in providing feedback to the board members. One of the things that we did talk about, we didn't necessarily talk about it. We received a presentation from the TA, and it's about how do you connect with the other counties around us. So San Francisco, Alameda, and Santa Clara, and looking at a variety of ways. And Adina 11 came up with a really great suggestion that, I'm surprised that we haven't been doing it, but, having commuter buses go across the San Mateo Bridge. I mean, how many times have you seen a bus on the bridge? I've never seen it, and I've been in this town for a long time. So, yeah, there just needs to be greater collaboration, and yeah, I appreciate the feedback that Chris provided.
Well, thank you. So, we've done oral communications number 2, and that brings us to adjourning the meeting. And it is 8:42 p.m. I call the meeting adjourned. Thank you.